Now, the Morning Majority on 630.
WMAL. 8:07 on WMAL, a stormy Thursday morning. What a morning it's been. Brian Neiman, Matt Lewis from the Daily Caller. We will get to your phone calls coming up on the whole birther thing. But first, we have John Bolton, former UN ambassador, on the program. Mr. Bolton, Mr. Ambassador, good morning. I wanted to first start off with the changes in the national security team with General Petraeus going to the CIA, it appears, and also Leon Panetta going to defense from the CIA. What do you make of the changes? Are they, in fact, good changes?
Well, I think they indicate no real departure from the policy we can expect by the administration. You know, they're determined to cut the Pentagon budget. They've already cut it very substantially. In the first 2 years, they're determined to cut it more. Panetta, former head of OMB, that looks right on target. It's the wrong target, going in the wrong direction, but I think that's what they want to do. And I think, interestingly as well, of course, Panetta served as both OMB director and White House chief of staff under President Clinton. Mm-hmm. So Secretary of State Clinton obviously knows him well, and I think in the Obama style of things, he doesn't like disagreement or he doesn't like people stepping out of line. So you've got, I think, that factor as well. Petraeus to the CIA is a little bit harder to understand. His normal line of progression would have been after the military commands in Iraq and Afghanistan and the Central Command to move up and be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But I think the White House may worry that's a little bit too prominent, so CIA is not a bad job, but it's also one that's not exactly in the limelight.
Really? I would think that you would want to be head of the CIA before you want to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
I think if you're a career soldier, chairman of the Joint Chiefs is the highest thing you'd want to aspire to. But as I say, CIA is not a bad job either.
Yeah. With Petraeus going to the CIA, the Post had this morning saying that maybe more militarized. Do you see that as a possibility, especially with what's going on in the Middle East and using the CIA essentially as a de facto army?
Well, as usual, the media is behind the scenes. I mean, there have been a lot of CIA paramilitary activities over the years, and a lot of the people who are doing those paramilitary activities are former military. You know, we say, right, we have no boots on the ground in Pakistan. Well, there are some intelligence agents who about 3 days ago were officers in the Army or the Marines. So there is and has been historically blurring of missions when things are active internationally. But I think Petraeus is viewed by the Obama White House as a competent, experienced manager, somebody they've worked with for 2 years. So moving him to the CIA minimizes the risk of a new factor in internal administration management, and that lack of flamboyance, lack of really people who stand out on their own, being part of a sort of organization men team, I think is important to the White House.
But do you think that's the best way to use the CIA as a paramilitary agency?
Well, honestly, I would use it for a lot more clandestine activity. I really think returning to the capabilities we had when Allen Dulles was head of the CIA should be an objective, but I also think there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done to build up our human intelligence capability. We've got great technical capabilities, far and away the best in the world, but our human intelligence has been in disarray really since the Church and Pike commissions of the 1970s. So I hope Petraeus will focus on that too.
What about Afghanistan? Does Petraeus' departure foreshadow a precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Well, I think that's the big decision coming up for Obama. I think he clearly, looking toward the July date that he set for himself, he'd like to be able to announce a big withdrawal. Because I think he needs to do something, especially after this debacle in Libya that he's ordered up. He needs to appease the left of his own party. He does not want a primary challenge. And he basically promised there'd be a substantial withdrawal in December of 2009 when he announced the Afghan surge to begin with. On the other hand, I don't think conditions on the ground in Afghanistan warrant a really substantial drawdown. I'm sure that's what Petraeus will be arguing in his last months there. So this will be a real test of Obama. Does he do the right thing in terms of national security, or does he bend to the political winds in his own party?
Let's get into Syria first before we get into Libya and what's going on there. Bashar Assad obviously murdering his own people in the streets. What can the United States? I know you said that this issue should have been resolved a long time ago, but the bottom line is, we're stuck here now. And after what was going on in Libya, I don't see us getting involved militarily. What can you do in Syria to get Assad out?
Well, what we should have been doing years ago was working with the Syrian opposition, and there is a lot of opposition to the regime. It's people who don't like the interference of Iran in their affairs, who don't like the rule of the Ba'ath Party in Syria, and who don't like the oppression of the Assad family. I mean, these recent killings have been tragic, to be sure, but in the history of Assad and his family and the Ba'ath Party, this is peanuts. These people have killed tens of thousands of Syrians over the years in order to stay in power. The difference here is that Iran has a huge strategic stake in keeping this regime in power. This is a real foothold for them in the Arab world. It's their link to Hezbollah, the terrorist group that's effectively running Lebanon. So it would be a real strategic setback to Iran if we could throw this regime out.
Oh, well, but how do you do that without actually putting boots on the ground or having a no-fly zone or whatever?
Well, I think it's harder now because we're starting from a base of doing essentially nothing. The Obama administration returned an ambassador to Syria. They've called Assad a reformer, which just boggles my mind. So I think regime change is a long-term strategy, but better late than never.
We had James Woolsey on, the former head of the CIA, and he said obviously the president has surrounded himself with some great people in the intelligence world, but the problem is the president more than it is the people that he's hired essentially to work with him. But he also said with Syria and what else is going on in the Arab world that we need to make sure that the protesters, the demonstrators, the rebels know that we are behind them, that we are with them, to make that clear in Syria and Iran, which I understand. But if you can't back that up militarily, aren't you setting these people up to be slaughtered?
Well, that's why I do think you've got to be in a position to support them. We have a long history in the United States of saying to people, go out in the streets and revolt, and then not supporting them, going back to the Central and Eastern European revolts during the Cold War, Hungary in 1956 and so on. So I think you've got to have a long-term objective of overthrowing the regime in Iran and overthrowing the regime in Syria, containing Hezbollah in Lebanon, and I don't simply fault the Obama administration for that. I fault the Bush administration, too, for not doing more to make regime change the objective in both those cases.
All right. I have to ask you, because your name has been mentioned as a possible 2012 candidate, what do you make of the birther issue and Donald Trump? You're a very serious guy. What do you make of all of this?
I never thought it was a serious issue. I thought it was a distraction. I thought it gave Obama a lot of opportunity to paint his critics, legitimate critics, as racist and worse. And I never thought it was going to go anywhere. What I don't understand is why the president decided yesterday was the right day to dump the birth certificate out. He could have done it 2 years ago. He could have waited till the middle of the campaign next year.
Right.
I'm sure there was a political reason for it. I just haven't figured it out yet.
Okay, and are you still mulling that decision over, or when can we expect an announcement from you whether or not you're going to run?
Well, I'm thinking I'm doing more than mulling. I'm thinking about it very seriously because if you look at the past several months of demonstrations and turmoil in the Middle East, a lot of the so-called political experts say, "Oh, the American people don't care about foreign policy; they only vote about domestic issues." Well, my advice would be go fill your car's gas tank, and that'll tell you all you need to know about foreign policy. I think the American people are very concerned about the lack of leadership that the president's demonstrated, and that his policies are endangering our interests and endangering the very frail economic recovery we've got going. So I think the foreign and domestic issues tie together, and I think we need leadership in national security, which we certainly do not have now.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, good to have you on the program as always. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
John Bolton here on